Chapter 1. I should have known that in a city where every breath is measured, every heartbeat recorded, love would become the most dangerous crime of all. But I wore the mask anyway, and I walked through those neon-lit doors on the arm of the one man I was never supposed to touch. My name is Evelyn Ashford, and I am a liar. Not the small, polite kind of liar that every proper Victorian lady must be to survive the scrutiny of society, but the profound, soul-deep kind whose deception could bring ruin not only to herself, but to everyone she loves. I am engaged to Lord Cameron Hargrove, the most powerful industrial magnate in London, the man who built the surveillance systems that now watch over every street corner, every railway platform, every glittering ballroom in this electric age. And I am in love with Adrian Vale, the brilliant engineer who once believed that technology could set us free before he realized it had become our cage. The night of the grand neon masquerade began like any other preparation for my eventual imprisonment. I stood in my dressing room at Hargrove House while my lady's maid, Martha, laced my corset with practiced efficiency. Through the tall windows, I could see London spreading below us in layers of old stone and new light. The ancient city had been transformed in the last decade. Gas lamps had given way to electric neon that blazed in blues and purples and poisonous greens, casting everything in an otherworldly glow that made the fog itself seem alive. Steam rose from the countless factories that churned day and night, their smokestacks crowned with pulsing lights that monitored production, efficiency, the very tempo of progress itself. Cameron had done this. Cameron and men like him, who saw in every innovation not possibility, but control. The scanners at every public entrance, the identification machines that recorded your face, your gait, the distinctive rhythm of your pulse, the punch cards that tracked your movements through the city like a vast mechanical memory that never forgot, never forgave. He called it safety. He called it the future. I called it a prison built of light and data, beautiful and inescapable. Martha fastened the last hook of my gown, a creation of midnight blue silk overlaid with silver netting that caught the light like captured stars. It was a dress designed to dazzle, to make me the perfect ornament on Cameron's arm at the ball he was hosting in our honor. Our engagement ball. The celebration of a union that would join his industrial empire with my family's old name and older money. A marriage that would cement his position in society just as surely as his machine cemented his control over it. I should have been grateful. My father had made it clear enough these past months. The Ashfords had name and history, but our fortune had dwindled with each passing year, eaten away by bad investments and my late brother's gambling debts. Cameron's offer had been generous beyond measure. More than generous. It had been a rescue, and all it cost me was my heart. I met Adrian 6 months ago, in the least romantic place imaginable. The patent office on Chancery Lane, where I had gone to file papers for my father, who was too ill to make the journey himself. I had been standing at the counter, struggling with the bureaucratic forms that seemed designed to confuse rather than clarify, when a voice beside me said, "Do you need help with that?" I looked up into eyes the color of smoke, set in a face that was handsome in the way of men who think too much and sleep too little. He wore a simple dark coat, nothing like the elaborate dress of Cameron and his circle, and his hands were stained with ink and oil. He helped me complete the forms. We talked. He walked me out into the cold spring air, and somehow we ended up in a tea shop on Fleet Street, talking about everything and nothing. He told me he was an engineer working on railway signal systems, trying to make them safer, more reliable. I told him about my love of photography, how I had converted one of the unused rooms at home into a darkroom, how I loved the magic of watching an image emerge from blank paper in the chemical bath. We talked for 2 hours. When I finally returned home, I realized I had forgotten to ask his name. But London is not so large when fate decides to play matchmaker. I saw him again a week later at the British Museum, standing before the same Egyptian artifacts I had come to sketch. and then again at a lecture on electrical theory at the Royal Institution, where I had gone with my father and he had come alone, scribbling notes in a battered journal. Each time we talked a little longer. Each time it became harder to say goodbye. I told myself it was friendship. I told myself that I was lonely, that Cameron was always busy with his factories and his machines, that there was no harm in conversation. But I knew the truth even then. I knew it in the way my heart lifted when I saw Adrian across a room. I knew it in the way his smile seemed to hold light that no neon could match. I knew it in the sick, guilty feeling that settled in my stomach every time I returned home to find another gift from Cameron waiting for me. A necklace of diamonds and sapphires, a pair of opera glasses with lenses so fine they could count the threads in the curtains. A miniature music box that played our song, the one he had chosen without asking me if I even liked it. Cameron did not love me. I understood that. He wanted me the way he wanted everything else, as a possession that completed his collection. He wanted my family's history, my face at his table, my body in his bed to produce the heirs that would carry on his name. He was not unkind. He was never unkind. He was simply empty, a man who had turned himself into a machine so efficient that nothing human remained inside. But Adrian looked at me as though I were a person, not a prize. He listened when I spoke. He argued with me about art and science and whether progress was truly moving us forward or simply in circles. He made me laugh. He made me think. He made me feel alive in a way I had not felt since childhood, before I learned that being a woman meant being a thing to be bartered and sold. I knew it was impossible. I knew it was dangerous. I knew that if Cameron ever found out, he would destroy Adrian without hesitation. Cameron's reach was long and his memory longer. He had ruined men for far less than touching what he considered his. And yet, I could not stop. I met Adrian in museums and libraries, in parks and tea shops, always in public, always careful, always terrified. We never touched beyond the formal handshake. We never spoke of love. But it was there between us, bright and terrible and doomed. Tonight was supposed to be the beginning of the end. The grand neon masquerade, held in the vast ballroom of Hargrove House, with its floor of polished marble and its ceiling painted with gods and monsters, all of it lit by neon fixtures that Cameron had installed himself. 1,000 guests in masks and finery, dancing beneath electric stars while machines recorded every entrance, every exit, every moment. Cameron had been working on the scanner for months, perfecting it. He was so proud of it. A device that could identify anyone regardless of disguise, reading the unique patterns of breath and pulse and movement that no mask could hide. He had installed it at the entrance to the ballroom, a sleek archway of brass and glass that hummed with invisible energy. He told me it was the future of security. He told me that soon every door in London would have one, that crime would become impossible, that the city would finally be safe. But I heard what he did not say, that privacy would die, that secrets would become extinct, that love like mine, forbidden and fragile, would have nowhere left to hide. Martha placed the mask over my face, a delicate thing of silver filigree that covered the upper half of my features, leaving my mouth and chin exposed. It had been made specially for me, studded with tiny electric lights that pulsed in time with some hidden mechanism. Beautiful, expensive, a collar dressed as jewelry. I should have gone downstairs. I should have taken my place beside Cameron in the receiving line, smiling at his guests, playing the role of the devoted fiancé. That was what I had planned. That was what I had promised. But then the message came. A note, slipped under my door by some unseen hand, written in handwriting I would have known anywhere. The park. Midnight. Please, one last time. I stood there with the note trembling in my gloved hands, and I knew I was lost. I knew that going to him would change everything, that it would be the end of all my careful pretending. But I also knew that I could not refuse. Not tonight. Not when tomorrow I would have to stand beside Cameron and accept his ring in front of all of London, sealing a fate I did not want but could not escape. So I went. I left through the servants' entrance, my mask still in place, my heart hammering against my ribs. The park was only a few streets away, a small square of green in the heart of the city, lit by neon lamps that turned the bare winter trees into skeletal sculptures of blue light. Adrian was waiting by the fountain, his own mask pushed up on his forehead, his expression stricken. "We should not meet like this," I said, but my voice held no conviction. "I know," he replied. "I know it's madness. But I had to see you. I had to tell you." His hands found mine, warm despite the cold. "Evelyn, I cannot let you marry him. I cannot stand by and watch you throw your life away to a man who sees you as nothing more than another acquisition." "You know I have no choice," I whispered. "My family, the debts, there is always a choice." He pulled me closer, and I let him, let myself feel the warmth of his body through the thin fabric of our clothes. "Come away with me. Tonight. Now. I have money saved. Not much, but enough to get us out of London. We could go to Scotland, to the continent, anywhere he cannot reach." It was a fantasy, beautiful and impossible. Cameron's reach extended far beyond London. He had business partners in every major city, contracts with every railway, connections in Parliament itself. And even if we could escape, even if we could somehow disappear, my family would be ruined. My father, already ill, would never survive the scandal. My mother and sisters would be outcasts. "I cannot," I said, and the words tasted like ashes. "You know I cannot." "Then let me have tonight," he said fiercely. "Let me have one night where you are mine and not his. Come back with me to the ball. Walk through those doors on my arm. Let them see us together, just once, before you are lost to me forever." It was madness. It was suicide. The scanner would record us. Cameron would know. But standing there in the cold blue light with Adrian's hands in mine, I found I did not care. Let the machines see. Let them record. Let Cameron know that even if he owned my future, he did not own my heart. "Yes," I said. "Yes." We returned to Hargrove House through the front entrance, masked and anonymous in the crush of arriving guests. The ballroom blazed before us, a cavern of light and sound. Neon fixtures lined the walls in geometric patterns, pulsing in shades of violet and cyan. The ceiling glittered with thousands of tiny bulbs, arranged to mimic constellations. The orchestra played from a raised platform, their instruments wired with pickups that amplified the sound through hidden speakers. It was magnificent and monstrous, a perfect reflection of the man who had created it. And there, at the entrance, was the scanner, the archway of brass and glass, humming its soft mechanical song. We would have to pass through it to enter the ballroom. Adrian's hand tightened on mine. "Are you certain?" he asked. I looked up at him, at this man who had shown me what love could be, and I smiled beneath my mask. "I am certain," I said. We stepped through the scanner together. I felt nothing, no tingle of electricity, no sense of being observed, just the faint warmth of the lights washing over us. And then we were through, into the ballroom, surrounded by spinning couples and laughter and the bright, terrible beauty of Cameron's creation. I searched the crowd for him and found him near the far wall, speaking with a group of industrialists, his own mask pushed up carelessly on his head, as if even this minor concession to frivolity annoyed him. He had not seen us yet. For this moment, we were safe. Adrian led me onto the dance floor, and we joined the waltz. His hand on my waist, mine on his shoulder, moving in perfect time to music that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. Around us, other couples spun in their masks and finery, faces hidden, identities obscured. For these few hours, everyone could pretend to be someone else. Everyone could forget the weight of duty and expectation. But I knew the truth. The scanner had recorded us. The machine had seen through our masks, had measured our breathing and our heartbeats, had logged our entrance as clearly as if we had announced ourselves by name. And tomorrow, when Cameron reviewed the data as he always did, studying the patterns and the numbers with the same cold precision he applied to everything, he would know. He would know that I had walked through his doors with another man, that I had danced in his ballroom with someone other than him, that I had betrayed him in the most public way possible, surrounded by all of London society, trusting in masks that could not hide the truth. And then, I knew, everything would end. But that was tomorrow. Tonight, I had this. Adrian's arms around me, his eyes meeting mine through the eye holes of our masks, his whispered words in my ear. I love you, Evelyn Ashford. Whatever happens, remember that I love you. I pressed closer, not caring who might see, not caring about scandal or ruin or the machines that watched our every move. And I love you, I whispered back. God help me, Adrian Vale, but I love you. The waltz carried us around the ballroom one more time, and I closed my eyes, trying to burn this moment into memory, the music and the light and the warmth of his touch. One perfect moment before the world came crashing down. When I opened them again, I saw Cameron watching us from across the room. His mask was still pushed up, and his expression was unreadable. But even from that distance, I could see the cold calculation in his eyes, the mechanical precision of a man who was already solving a problem. He raised his glass to me in a small salute, and smiled. Chapter 2. The rest of the ball passed in a blur of false smiles and champagne that tasted like copper on my tongue. Adrian and I danced only once more before common sense and terror drove us apart. He melted into the crowd, disappearing among the masked guests, and I returned to my place at Cameron's side like a dog returning to its master. He said nothing. He touched my hand with cool, dry fingers and introduced me to ministers and merchants, to society matrons and their simpering daughters, to everyone who mattered in this new London of electric lights and mechanical eyes. And all the while, his smile never wavered, never reached his eyes. I knew that smile. It was the same one he wore when reviewing production reports from his factories, when analyzing the data streams from his surveillance network, when calculating profit margins and loss ratios with the dispassionate precision of a man who had long ago traded his humanity for efficiency. It was the smile of someone who had already won, who was simply waiting for the right moment to collect his prize. The guests began to leave near dawn, spilling out into the gray morning light in their wilted finery and smudged masks. The neon still blazed against the pale sky, garish now without the cover of darkness, turning the fog into sickly purple clouds. I stood in the entrance hall with Cameron, bidding farewell to the last stragglers, my face aching from hours of forced pleasantness. When the final carriage pulled away, he turned to me. "You must be exhausted," he said. His voice was perfectly modulated, perfectly polite. "Go rest, Evelyn. We will speak later." I wanted to ask him what he meant. I wanted to demand whether he had seen, whether he knew, whether the reckoning was coming now, or whether he intended to make me wait, to stretch out my terror like a torturer stretching out the moments before the blade falls. But I said nothing. I simply nodded and climbed the stairs to my chambers, feeling his eyes on my back the entire way. Martha helped me out of my gown and into my nightdress, her efficient hands working in silence. She had been with my family since I was a child, and I wondered sometimes what she thought of this engagement, of the way I was being sold off to save us from poverty. But servants learned early to keep their opinions to themselves, especially in houses like this where even the walls had ears. When she left, I lay down on the bed and stared at the ceiling, watching the morning light creep across the plaster moldings. I did not sleep. I could not. My mind replayed the evening over and over, Adrian's hand in mine, the warmth of his arms during the waltz, Cameron's cold smile across the ballroom, the scanner archway with its innocent hum, recording everything, seeing everything, remembering everything. What had I been thinking? What madness had possessed me to walk through those doors with Adrian, to dance with him in front of all of London, to betray Cameron so publicly and so completely? I had known the scanner would record us. I had known that Cameron would review the data. And yet, I had done it anyway, as if some part of me wanted to be caught, wanted the decision taken out of my hands. Perhaps that was the truth of it. Perhaps I was simply too much of a coward to choose my own fate, so I had forced the choice upon Cameron instead. The summons came at noon. Martha appeared at my door with a breakfast tray I had not requested and a message delivered in Cameron's secretary's precise handwriting. Lord Hargrove requests your presence in his study at 1 o'clock. I dressed carefully, choosing a day dress of dove-gray silk with black trim, severe and proper. I pinned my hair back with the discipline of a soldier preparing for battle. When I looked at myself in the mirror, I barely recognized the woman staring back, pale, hollow-eyed, already defeated. Cameron's study occupied the entire east wing of Hargrove House. It was not so much a room as a command center, lined with filing cabinets and calculation engines, dominated by a massive desk of polished mahogany that held nothing but a single leather portfolio and a small brass device I did not recognize. The walls were covered with maps of London, each one marked with colored pins and lines that tracked the spread of his surveillance network across the city. Gasworks, railway stations, government buildings, banks, theaters, parks, all of them wired into his great machine, all of them feeding data into the vast mechanical brain he had built beneath this house. He stood at the window when I entered, looking out over the city that he was slowly transforming into his own image. He had changed from his evening clothes into a simple dark suit, and without the elaborate costume of wealth, he looked almost ordinary, almost human. "Close the door," he said without turning. I did. The sound of it clicking shut felt like the closing of a coffin lid. He gestured to one of the chairs facing his desk. "Please, sit." I sat. He remained standing, still looking out at the city, and for a long moment, the only sound was the distant clatter of carriages on the street below and the soft ticking of the calculation engines that lined the walls. Finally, he spoke. "The grand neon masquerade was a success," he said. 647 guests in attendance, 1,732 data points recorded by the scanner, an excellent test of the system. He paused, and very illuminating. My hands clenched in my lap, hidden beneath the folds of my skirt. He turned from the window then and crossed to his desk. He opened the leather portfolio and withdrew a single sheet of paper covered in neat columns of numbers and letters. "Entry log," he said. "Automatically generated by the scanner and printed this morning. It records not just names, but correlations, who arrived with whom, who stood close to whom in the entrance queue, who showed elevated heart rates indicating emotional arousal or stress." He looked at me then, and his eyes were the color of winter ice. "You arrived at 11:43, he said, "alone, according to the guest list. But the scanner tells a different story. It recorded 2 individuals passing through within 0.3 seconds of each other. Same respiratory rhythm, synchronized pulse patterns, physical proximity within 6 inches. He set the paper down on the desk between us. "The system identified both of you, of course. Facial structure beneath the masks, gait analysis, even the distinctive pattern of your breathing. You cannot hide from the machines, Evelyn. I made certain of that." I forced myself to meet his gaze. "What are you going to do?" An interesting question. He sat down behind the desk, steepling his fingers. "What would you have me do? You betrayed me in my own home, in front of 600 witnesses. You made me a fool and a cuckold before I could even claim you as my wife. By all rights, I should call off the engagement immediately. I should ensure that your name is ruined beyond all repair, that no respectable family will receive you, that you spend the rest of your days as a cautionary tale told to other young women who might be tempted to follow their hearts instead of their duties." He paused, and I waited for the blade to fall. "But I am not going to do that," he continued, "because unlike you, Evelyn, I am a practical man. I do not make decisions based on emotion. I make them based on calculation, on cost and benefit, on what serves my interests most effectively." "What do you want?" I whispered. "What I have always wanted, you as my wife. Your family's name joined to mine. The alliance between old money and new industry that will secure my position in society and give me the legitimacy I need to expand my operations." He leaned forward. "I do not love you, Evelyn. I never pretended to. Love is a weakness, a chemical imbalance of the brain that clouds judgment and leads to irrational behavior. What I offer you is better than love. I offer you security, status, the protection of my name and fortune. And in return, you will give me the respectability I require and the heirs who will inherit my empire." And Adrian. The name escaped before I could stop it. Cameron's expression did not change. "Ah, yes, Adrian Vale, civil engineer, currently employed by the Metropolitan Railway Company on signal systems, salary of £300 per annum, rents rooms on Gower Street, has a mother living in Surrey who depends on him for support." He recited the facts as if reading from a file, which I realized with sick certainty he probably was. "I know everything about him, Evelyn. Everything. What have you done to him?" "Nothing. Yet." He picked up the brass device from his desk, turning it over in his hands. "This is a prototype, a personal tracker. Once activated and linked to an individual's biological signature, it can follow them anywhere in the city where my scanners are installed, which, as you can see, is most of the city." He set it down again. "I could activate one for Mr. Vale. I could watch his every movement, every meeting, every conversation. I could ensure that he loses his position with the railway, that his name is blacklisted from every engineering firm in London, that his mother loses her cottage because he can no longer afford to support her. I could destroy him, Evelyn, utterly and completely, and no one would ever know I had done it. The machines would do it for me, invisible and implacable." "You are a monster," I said. "No, I am simply a man who understands how the world works. Power is not about violence or cruelty. It is about systems, networks, the patient accumulation of data until you know everything about everyone, until you can predict their actions before they take them, control their choices without them ever realizing they are being controlled." He leaned back in his chair. "I am building the future, Evelyn. A city where crime is impossible because every citizen is monitored at all times, where secrets cannot exist because the machines see all, where chaos is replaced by order, uncertainty by precision. And you can be part of that future, or you can watch it crush the man you love. The choice hung between us like a blade. If I marry you," I said slowly, "you will leave Adrian alone. I will do better than that. I will ensure his career flourishes, a promotion, a position with the government railway expansion project, enough income to support his mother in comfort and even to marry someday, if he chooses. He will have a good life, Evelyn, just not with you. And if I refuse, then I will destroy him, and you, and your family. Your father's remaining investments will mysteriously fail. Your mother and sisters will find themselves unwelcome in every drawing room in London, and Mr. Vale will discover that the city has no place for a man who dared to touch what belongs to me." He spread his hands. "The choice is yours. I am not forcing you. I am simply laying out the options." But we both knew that was a lie. There was no choice. There had never been a choice. He held all the power, all the data, all the machinery of control. And I had nothing but my heart, which he did not want, and my love, which he could not comprehend. I thought of Adrian, his smile, his dreams of making the railways safer, of using technology to help people rather than control them. I thought of his mother, who I had never met, but whose welfare depended on her son's income. I thought of my own family, already teetering on the edge of ruin. So many people whose lives would be destroyed if I chose love over duty. And I thought of myself, the woman I might have been if I had been born in a different time, a different world. Free to choose my own path, free to love whom I wished. But I had not been born into that world. I had been born into this one, where women were commodities and love was a luxury we could not afford. "I will marry you," I said. My voice sounded strange, distant, as if it belonged to someone else. "But I have a condition." Cameron raised an eyebrow. "You are in no position to negotiate." Nevertheless, I met his cold gaze with what remained of my courage. "I will be your wife. I will bear your children and stand at your side and play whatever role you require. But I will not be your prisoner. I want access to the house, all of it, including your laboratory and your data rooms. I want to understand the systems you are building. I want to learn." For the first time since I had entered the study, something like surprise crossed his face. "Why?" "Because if I am to be part of your future, I should understand what that future is, and because knowledge is the only weapon I have left." He considered this, his fingers tapping against the desk. Finally, he nodded, agreed. "You may have access to the technical areas of the house. You may study the systems. You may even assist with the project if you prove capable. But you will not interfere. You will not attempt to sabotage or undermine the work. And you will never see Adrian Vale again. Not alone, not in public, not even in passing on the street. If my trackers detect any contact between you, the agreement is void and the consequences will be immediate." "I understand." "Then we have a bargain." He stood and extended his hand across the desk, as if we were business partners concluding a transaction rather than two people negotiating the terms of a marriage. "The wedding will take place in 6 weeks. I have already made the arrangements." I rose and took his hand. His grip was cool and firm, the hand of a man who had never known doubt or hesitation. We shook, and I felt the door of my cage swing shut and lock behind me. When I left his study, I walked through the corridors of Hargrove House as if moving through a dream. The servants averted their eyes as I passed. They knew. Somehow, they always knew. Perhaps they had heard raised voices through the door. Perhaps they had simply learned to read the faces of the people they served, to see the marks that power left on its victims. I returned to my chambers and sat at my writing desk. I took out paper and pen, and I wrote a letter to Adrian. Not a long letter, not a love letter. Just a few lines to tell him that I could not see him again, that my decision was final, that he should forget me and move on with his life. I told him that I wished him well, that I hoped his work would bring him fulfillment, that I was grateful for the brief time we had shared. I did not tell him why. I did not explain about Cameron's threats or the impossible choice I had been given. I simply released him, as cleanly and completely as I could, because that was the only kindness I had left to offer. I sealed the letter and gave it to Martha to post. Then I sat by the window and watched the neon lights flicker on as evening fell, painting the fog in shades of violet and poison green. Somewhere out there in the city, Adrian was living his life, unaware that I had just sold mine to save his. Somewhere out there, the scanners were watching. The machines were recording. The great mechanical brain of Cameron's creation was processing data and finding patterns and slowly, inexorably, transforming London into a prison of light and information. And I was to be its queen. The thought should have terrified me. Instead, I felt only a strange, cold clarity. Cameron had given me access to his systems. He had invited me into the heart of his machine. He thought he had won, that he had secured my cooperation through threats and manipulation. But he had also made a mistake. He had assumed I would remain passive. He had assumed that because he had broken my heart, he had also broken my spirit. He had assumed that I would accept my fate and play my role and never think to fight back. But Cameron did not understand love. He did not understand that it could be a strength as well as a weakness, that it could make you fierce as well as vulnerable, that it could give you something worth fighting for even when all seemed lost. He had given me access to his laboratory, to his data rooms, to the very systems he was using to control the city. And I intended to learn everything I could about them. Every weakness, every flaw, every vulnerable point in his vast network of surveillance and control. Because if I was going to be trapped in this marriage, if I was going to spend the rest of my life as the wife of a monster, then I was going to make certain that the monster could not spread his corruption any further. I was going to find a way to stop him, even if it destroyed me in the process. I stood and crossed to my wardrobe, where I kept my camera and developing equipment hidden beneath boxes of old gowns. I pulled out the camera and checked its mechanisms, making certain everything still worked. Cameron thought he knew me. He thought I was just another society woman, decorative and docile. But he had never asked about my photography. He had never inquired about the hours I spent in my darkroom, learning the chemistry of light and shadow, mastering the art of capturing truth in silver halide crystals. He had never realized that a woman who understood how to develop images might also understand how to develop evidence. I smiled then, for the first time since the ball. It was not a happy smile. It was the smile of someone who has just realized they still have teeth, even if they have been defanged. The game was not over yet. Chapter 3. The weeks before the wedding passed in a haze of fittings and arrangements, of guest lists and menu selections, of all the elaborate theater that surrounds a society marriage. My mother arrived from the country, pale and trembling with relief that her daughter had secured such an advantageous match. My sisters wrote letters full of envy and excitement. My father, too ill to make the journey, sent his blessing in a note that shook with more than just his weakening hand. They all believed I was fortunate. They all believed I was saved. None of them knew the price of salvation. Cameron was true to his word. He gave me free access to the lower levels of Hargrove House, to the rooms that held his machines and his data, to the beating heart of the empire he was building. The first time I descended the iron staircase that led from the main house down into the converted cellars, I felt as though I was walking into the underworld itself. The air below was different, cooler, drier. It smelled of oil and electricity, of hot metal and paper, and something else I could not quite identify, something sharp and chemical that made my eyes water. The walls were lined with pipes and wires, all of them humming with current, all of them feeding into the massive calculation engines that filled room after room in orderly rows. Cameron employed a staff of 12 men to maintain the machines, engineers and mathematicians and operators who fed punch cards into the readers and collected the printed results. They worked in shifts around the clock, keeping the system running without pause, processing the endless stream of data that flowed in from the scanners placed throughout the city. When I appeared in the doorway of the first data room, they looked up with expressions of surprise and poorly concealed resentment. A woman in their domain. How shocking, how improper. But Cameron had given his orders, and they did not dare disobey. The chief engineer, a thin man named Silas Drummond with ink-stained fingers and wire-rimmed spectacles, was assigned to be my guide. He showed me through the rooms with barely contained irritation, explaining the systems in terse, technical language that he clearly did not expect me to understand. But I did understand. More than he anticipated. Photography had taught me about chemistry and optics, about precision and timing, about the way information could be captured and preserved. And the underlying principles were not so different. Data instead of light. Mechanical calculation instead of chemical reaction. But the same fundamental truth. That reality could be recorded, analyzed, transformed into something permanent and immutable. The scanners, Drummond explained, were placed at key points throughout London, every major intersection, every railway platform, every entrance to government buildings and banks and theaters. Each one read the biological signatures of everyone who passed through its field, measuring dozens of variables. height and weight and gait, heart rate and respiration, even the unique thermal pattern of blood flow beneath the skin. The data was transmitted via electrical cable back to Hargrove House, where it was processed by the calculation engines and stored on massive reels of punch tape. "And what is done with this information?" I asked. "Analysis," Drummond replied. "Pattern recognition. The system can track individuals across the city. It can identify associations, predict movements, flag unusual behavior. Lord Hargrove has contracts with the Metropolitan Police, the Home Office, the banking syndicate. The data is used to prevent crime, to protect assets, to maintain order, and to control people," I said quietly. Drummond's expression tightened. "To keep people safe, Miss Ashford. Safety and control are not so different in the end." But they were. They were entirely different. Safety was protection from harm. Control was the elimination of choice. And Cameron's machines did not distinguish between the two. Over the following days, I became a regular presence in the data rooms. I arrived each morning after breakfast and stayed until late afternoon, watching the operators work, asking questions, learning the language of the machines. Drummond remained my reluctant instructor, and gradually his irritation gave way to something like grudging respect when I proved capable of understanding the technical details he explained. I learned to read the punch cards, to interpret the columns of holes that represented names and locations and times. I learned how the calculation engines processed the data, following chains of mechanical logic through gear trains and relay switches. I learned how the system indexed and cross-referenced information, building vast maps of social networks and movement patterns. And I learned the scope of Cameron's ambition. He was not content with scanners at public entrances. He had plans, carefully documented in notebooks kept in his office, to expand the network into private spaces. Scanners in shops and restaurants, in churches and meeting halls. Eventually, he dreamed, in private homes. Every door a checkpoint, every threshold a data point. A city where privacy was extinct, where every action was visible, every secret exposed. He called it the Panopticon Project, after the prison design where every cell could be observed from a central tower. A society where the possibility of surveillance was so complete that people would police themselves, would conform to expected behavior simply because they could never know when they were being watched. Order through omniscience, peace through absolute control. I found the plans in his office one afternoon when he was away at his factory. They were laid out on drafting tables in meticulous detail. Schematics for improved scanners, maps showing proposed installation sites, financial projections for the costs and revenues, letters from government ministers expressing interest, contracts with foreign powers who wanted to purchase the technology for their own cities. I stood there looking at those papers, and I felt something cold and terrible settle in my chest. This was not just about London. This was about the world. Cameron intended to export his vision of surveillance and control to every major city, to build a global network where no one could hide, where every human being was reduced to data points and biological signatures, where love and privacy and freedom became obsolete concepts from a more primitive age. And I was going to marry him. I was going to stand beside him at the altar and promise to honor and obey him, to support his work and bear his children and help him build this nightmare future, unless I found a way to stop him. I began to document everything. I brought my camera to the lower levels, hidden beneath my skirts in a specially sewn pocket. When Drummond and the operators were distracted with their work, I photographed the machines, the data reels, the planning documents spread across Cameron's desk. I used the fastest film stock I could obtain, pushed to its limits to work in the dim electric light of the cellar. The images were grainy and imperfect, but they were evidence. I developed the plates at night in my makeshift darkroom, working by the light of a single red-filtered lamp. I watched the images emerge from the chemical bath like ghosts taking form. Proof of what Cameron was building. Proof that could be shown to Parliament, to the newspapers, to anyone who might have the power to stop him. But who would listen to me? A woman. a bride purchased to lend legitimacy to a man's ambitions. Who would believe me over Cameron Hargrove, industrial magnate, government contractor, the man who was building the future? I needed more than photographs. I needed something irrefutable, something that would prove not just what Cameron was doing, but why it was wrong. Evidence of abuse, of lives destroyed, of the human cost of his mechanical precision. The answer came from an unexpected source. I was in the main data room one afternoon, watching the operators process the daily feed from the scanners, when I noticed something strange. One of the punch card reels was marked with a red tag, separate from the others. When I asked Drummond about it, his expression went carefully blank. "That is restricted data," he said. "Lord Hargrove's personal files." "What sort of files?" "Cases flagged for individual attention. People of interest." He hesitated, then added, "I am not authorized to discuss it further, but I was authorized. Cameron had given me access to everything." So that night, after the operators had gone home and the data rooms were empty except for the hum of the idling machines, I returned to the cellar. I found the reel marked with the red tag and threaded it into one of the card readers. I activated the machine and watched as it began to print the decoded information onto paper tape. What emerged was a list, names and addresses, occupations and family connections. And beside each name, a set of codes that indicated what action had been taken: termination of employment, denial of credit, blacklisting from professional organizations, public exposure of private matters. These were the people Cameron had destroyed, not through direct action, but through the careful manipulation of his data network. A word in the right ear, a file sent to the right office. The slow, invisible strangulation of reputation and livelihood, all untraceable back to him. And there, near the bottom of the list, was a name I recognized. Adrian Vale, engineer, Metropolitan Railway Company. Code designation, monitor and contain. My hands shook as I read the notes attached to his file. Cameron had not destroyed Adrian, not yet, but he was watching him, every movement tracked, every meeting recorded, and the notes made clear that at the first sign of contact with me, at the first hint of renewed relationship, the consequences would be immediate and total. I felt sick. I felt furious. I felt helpless and trapped and desperate all at once. This was the man I was going to marry. This was the future I had chosen to protect the people I loved. But in choosing it, I had only bound them more tightly in Cameron's web. I photographed the list, every page, every name, every damning detail. The flash powder flared in the darkness of the data room, and I prayed that no one would notice the light or smell the smoke. When I was done, I returned the reel to its place and fled back upstairs, my heart hammering, the precious photographic plates hidden in my skirts. In my darkroom, I developed the images with hands that would not stop trembling. And as the names emerged from the chemical bath, I realized what I had to do. I could not stop Cameron alone. I was one woman with a camera and a collection of evidence that no one would take seriously. But I did not have to be alone. There were others, people whose lives Cameron had destroyed, people who had reason to hate him as much as I did, people who might be willing to fight back if they knew the truth. I needed to find them. I needed to show them what I had discovered. I needed to build a resistance. The thought was terrifying. If Cameron discovered what I was planning, he would not simply call off the wedding. He would destroy me and everyone I cared about. He would use his machines and his data to erase us from existence, to turn us into cautionary tales about the cost of defiance. But if I did nothing, if I simply accepted my fate and allowed him to continue building his panopticon, then the destruction would spread far beyond my small circle. It would consume the city, the country, eventually, the world. I had to choose safety or freedom, compliance or resistance, the cage he offered or the risk of fighting back. I thought of Adrian, the way he had looked at me that night in the park, when he asked me to run away with him. The way he had spoken about technology, about his belief that it should serve humanity rather than enslave it. He had been right. And I had been a coward, but I was not going to be a coward anymore. The next morning, I told Cameron I needed to go into the city. "Shopping for the wedding," I said. "Last-minute arrangements." He looked at me with those cold, assessing eyes, and for a moment I thought he would refuse. But then he nodded. "Take the carriage," he said, "and the driver will remain with you at all times." "Of course," I replied. "I would not dream of going anywhere alone." The driver was one of Cameron's men, I had no doubt, watching me, reporting my movements. So I went to the shops I had claimed to visit. I purchased ribbons and gloves and other meaningless fripperies. I played my role as the eager bride, but I also, very carefully, very deliberately, left a note. It happened at a stationer's shop on Bond Street. I purchased writing paper and envelopes, and while the clerk was wrapping the purchase, I slipped a folded piece of paper beneath the counter with an address written on the outside. It was one of the names from Cameron's list, a journalist who had been blacklisted after writing an article critical of surveillance technology, a man who had lost his position at the Times and was now, according to the notes, working for small radical newspapers that operated from rented rooms and back-alley print shops. The note was brief. "I have information about Lord Cameron Hargrove's surveillance network. If you want to expose the truth, come to Hyde Park tomorrow at noon. Stand by the Serpentine Bridge. I will find you." I did not sign it. I did not explain who I was or how I had obtained the information. I simply left the note and walked away, praying that the clerk would deliver it and that the journalist would be desperate enough or curious enough or angry enough to come. That night, I could not sleep. I lay in bed listening to the house settle around me, to the distant hum of the machines in the cellar, to the sound of my own breathing in the darkness. Tomorrow, I would take the first step toward rebellion. Tomorrow, I would begin to dismantle the empire that Cameron was building. Or tomorrow, I would be caught, and everything I feared would come to pass. But fear, I had learned, was not a reason to stop. Fear was simply the price of caring about something more than your own survival. I thought of Adrian, alone in his rooms on Gower Street, unaware that he was being watched every moment. I thought of all the names on Cameron's list, all the lives destroyed by invisible manipulation. I thought of the city that Cameron wanted to create, a prison of light and data where love was obsolete and freedom was a forgotten dream. And I knew that whatever happened tomorrow, whatever consequences I faced, I could not live with myself if I did nothing. I rose and went to my desk. I took out my photographic plates, the ones showing the data rooms and the planning documents and the list of names. I packed them carefully in a wooden case lined with velvet, something that could be carried easily, that would not draw attention. Evidence, truth, the only weapons I had. And in the morning, I would take them to the park and hope that someone still cared enough to fight. The wedding was 12 days away. In 12 days, I would become Lady Hargrove, bound by law and vow to a man who saw people as data and love as weakness. But until that day came, I was still Evelyn Ashford, and Evelyn Ashford had work to do. I returned to bed and closed my eyes, and for the first time since the masquerade, I felt something other than despair. I felt the cold, fierce clarity of purpose. Chapter 4. The morning air was cold enough to burn my lungs. I stood on the Serpentine Bridge with my wooden case of photographic plates clutched beneath my cloak, watching the fog roll across the water like something alive. Hyde Park at noon should have been full of afternoon strollers and children with their nurses, but the gray November weather had driven most people indoors. Only a few hardy souls braved the cold, hurrying past with their collars turned up and their breath steaming in the air. I had left the carriage and driver near the park entrance, claiming I wanted to walk and clear my head before the final wedding preparations. The driver had objected, of course, citing Lord Hargrove's instructions, but I had insisted with enough aristocratic hauteur to make him back down. He would report this to Cameron, I knew that. But I was counting on the fact that a solitary walk in a public park would seem innocent enough. Melancholy, perhaps. The nerves of a bride. Nothing more. I waited. The church bells struck noon, their sound muffled by the fog. I began to wonder if the journalist had received my note, or if he had received it and dismissed it as a prank, or if he had simply decided that whatever information I possessed was not worth the risk of meeting a stranger in a park. Then I saw him, a man in a worn overcoat, moving slowly along the path toward the bridge. He was perhaps 40, with a scholar's stoop and ink stains on his fingers that even the cold could not hide. He stopped at the far end of the bridge and pulled out a newspaper, ostensibly reading, but his eyes flicked toward me and away again. The journalist. It had to be. I walked toward him slowly, my footsteps echoing on the wooden planks. When I was close enough to speak without raising my voice, I said, "Mr. Thomas Wickham? I believe you once wrote for the Times." He looked up, and his expression was wary. I did. Until I made the mistake of suggesting that perhaps unlimited government surveillance might not be an unmitigated good. He folded his newspaper. "And you are?" "Someone who can prove you were right." I opened my cloak enough to show him the edge of the wooden case. "I have documents, photographs. Evidence of what Lord Cameron Hargrove is really building with his Panopticon project. Evidence of lives destroyed, people blacklisted, reputations ruined, all through the manipulation of surveillance data." His eyes widened slightly. "Why would you give this to me? Because someone needs to expose the truth. Because I cannot do it alone. And because you have as much reason to hate him as I do." I met his gaze. "He destroyed your career, Mr. Wickham. He can destroy much more if he is not stopped. And who are you? Some rival industrialist's daughter? A spurned lover?" "I am his fiancé," I said quietly. The words hung in the cold air between us. Wickham stared at me, and I watched the calculation happen behind his eyes. The risk, the opportunity, the sheer improbability of this moment. "You are mad," he said finally. "If Hargrove discovers that you have betrayed him, he will destroy you, and anyone you involve." "I know, but the alternative is worse." I held out the case. "These are only copies. I have the original plates hidden. If you publish what is in here, if you expose what Cameron is doing, then at least the truth will be known, even if it costs me everything." He took the case slowly, as if it might explode in his hands. "What exactly am I looking at?" Photographs of the data rooms, the calculation engines, the surveillance network schematics, planning documents for the expansion of the project, and a list of everyone Cameron has targeted and destroyed using his systems. Your name is on that list, Mr. Wickham. So are dozens of others. Politicians who opposed him, businessmen who competed with him, workers who tried to organize against his factories, all of them brought down through invisible manipulation of data. He opened the case and pulled out one of the photographic prints. Even in the dim light, I could see his hands beginning to shake. "This is genuine," he said. "It is not a forgery?" "It is genuine. I swear it on everything I hold dear." He looked at me then, really looked at me, and I saw something shift in his expression. Not trust, exactly, but a willingness to believe, a desperate need to believe that perhaps, after all these months of exile and poverty and humiliation, he might have a chance at vindication. "I will need time to verify this," he said, "to find corroborating sources, to build a case that the newspapers will actually print. How much time? A week, perhaps 2. He closed the case and tucked it under his arm. "I know some editors at the Tribune. They are less afraid of Hargrove than most. If I can convince them, if I can show them this evidence, they might risk it." "I am getting married in 10 days, I said. "If you are going to publish, it needs to be before then. Once I am his wife, Cameron will have legal authority over me. He will be able to control everything I do, everywhere I go. He will be able to lock me away and no one will question it. Then I will work quickly." He started to turn away, then paused. Why are you doing this? If you hate him so much, why marry him at all? Because he left me no choice. Because he is holding hostage everyone I love. Because I am a woman in a world built by men like him, and we do not get to simply walk away from the cages we are sold into. I pulled my cloak tighter against the cold. But I can fight from inside the cage, and I will. He nodded slowly. You are either the bravest person I have ever met, or the most foolish. Perhaps both, I said. He left then, disappearing into the fog with my evidence tucked under his arm. I stood on the bridge for a long moment, watching the water flow beneath me, dark and cold and inexorable. I had done it. I had taken the first real step toward resistance, and now all I could do was wait and hope that it would be enough. The driver said nothing when I returned to the carriage, but I saw the way his eyes tracked my movements, the way he noted how long I had been gone. Cameron would know. Cameron would ask questions, but I had my answer ready. A walk, some thinking, the natural anxiety of a bride before her wedding. All true in their way, all carefully designed to hide the deeper truth. The days that followed were a study in controlled terror. I continued my routine. The data rooms, the wedding preparations, the endless social obligations that came with being Cameron's fiancé. All the while, I watched for signs that he suspected something, a change in his manner, a question that probed too deeply, an increase in surveillance. But Cameron seemed distracted, consumed by some new project in his laboratory. He spent long hours in the lowest level of the house, in rooms even I was not permitted to enter, working on something he would not discuss. When I asked Drummond about it, he simply shook his head. Lord Hargrove's private work, he said. No one is allowed in those rooms except him and his personal assistant. What is he building? I do not know. And I do not ask. Neither should you. But of course I asked, because that was the nature of secrets. The more carefully they were guarded, the more desperately you needed to know what they contained. I waited until late one night, when I knew Cameron was away at one of his factories, dealing with a breakdown in the production line. I descended to the lowest level and made my way to the sealed rooms at the far end of the corridor. The doors were locked, of course, but locks were mechanical devices, subject to the same principles of engineering as any other machine. And I had spent weeks learning how Cameron's machines worked. I had brought tools, pins and picks borrowed from the workshop, small enough to conceal in my sleeve. It took me 20 minutes of careful work, my fingers cramping in the cold, my heart hammering so loudly I was certain someone would hear. But finally, the lock yielded. The room beyond was lit by the dim red glow of heat lamps. It took my eyes a moment to adjust, to make sense of what I was seeing. And when they did, I wished they had not. The room was set up as a laboratory, but not for machines, for biology. There were tables covered in medical instruments, shelves lined with bottles of chemicals and preservatives, and in the center of the room, suspended in a tank of clear fluid, was something that made my blood run cold. A human brain, preserved, wired with electrodes, connected to a calculation engine that hummed softly in the darkness. I stood there frozen, unable to process what I was looking at. My mind refused to accept it. But there it was, undeniable. Horrifying. Cameron was not content with surveillance. He was not content with tracking people's movements and monitoring their behavior. He was trying to go deeper, to record not just what people did, but what they thought, what they felt, to map the human mind itself and reduce it to data. I do not know how long I stood there staring at that impossible, monstrous thing. It might have been seconds. It might have been hours. Time had stopped having meaning. Finally, I forced myself to move. I pulled out my camera with shaking hands and photographed everything. The brain in its tank, the instruments, the calculation engine. The notebooks filled with Cameron's meticulous handwriting, describing experiments and results and future plans. He had been testing on corpses, I learned from the notes. brains purchased from hospitals and asylums, trying to find a way to preserve the neural patterns, to record them before decay set in. So far, he had been unsuccessful. But he believed he was close. He believed that within a year, perhaps 2, he would be able to map a living mind, to copy it, to store it in his machines. And once he could do that, his control would be absolute. Not just over people's actions, but over their very thoughts. He could threaten to expose not just what they had done, but what they had imagined doing. He could punish thought crime before it ever became action. It was a vision of hell. A future where privacy did not just die, but where the very concept of a private self became obsolete. Where every human being was transparent, knowable, controllable down to their last neuron. I left the room and locked it again behind me, my hands still shaking. I climbed the stairs to my chambers and developed the photographs with tears streaming down my face. Because now I understood the true scope of what I was fighting. Not just surveillance, not just social control, but the complete annihilation of human autonomy, and I was going to marry the man who was trying to make it real. The next morning, I received a note delivered to the servants' entrance by a boy who disappeared before anyone could question him. It was from Wickham. 3 words: "We must meet." I went to him that afternoon, using the same excuse of wedding preparations. We met in a tea shop in Bloomsbury, far from fashionable society, where no one would recognize me. He looked exhausted, his eyes red-rimmed, his hands trembling around his cup. "I have verified your evidence," he said. "I found 3 people from that list willing to speak anonymously. Their stories corroborate everything in the documents. The Tribune has agreed to publish. They are setting the type now." "When?" I asked. "Tomorrow morning, front page. Full exposure of the Panopticon project and Hargrove's manipulation network." He paused. "There will be consequences. For all of us. I know. But there are worse things than consequences." I pulled out the new photographs, the ones from Cameron's secret laboratory. "And you need to see this, because it is not just about surveillance anymore. It is about something far more terrible." I showed him the images of the preserved brain, the equipment, the notes describing Cameron's research. I watched his face go pale. "Dear God," he whispered, "this is madness. This is abomination. This is the future he is building. And it will not stop with London. He has contracts with governments across Europe, with colonial administrations. He wants to take this everywhere. And if someone does not stop him now, no one will be able to stop him later." Wickham stared at the photographs for a long time. Then he looked up at me, and his expression was grim. "I will add this to the article," he said, "even if it means they come for me. Even if it means I hang for libel or treason or whatever charge Hargrove can manufacture. This needs to be known." "Thank you," I said quietly. He shook his head. "Do not thank me. Just survive. Because when this prints, Hargrove will know it came from you. There is no one else who could have accessed those rooms, no one else who would have reason to betray him, and his revenge will be terrible. I know, but I am done being afraid." I stood to leave, then paused. "Mr. Wickham, when you publish the article, please mention Adrian Vale, the engineer. Include his name among the victims of Cameron's surveillance. Let people know what was done to him." "Why?" "Because I want him to know," I said. "I want him to understand why I did what I did. Even if I never see him again, I want him to know that I fought, that I tried to make it right." Wickham nodded. "I will." I left the tea shop and returned to the carriage. The wedding was now 7 days away. In 7 days, I would stand beside Cameron at the altar and promise to love, honor, and obey him. But tomorrow, the truth would be exposed. Tomorrow, all of London would know what kind of man he really was. And then, one way or another, it would be over. That night, I packed a small bag with essentials: money, jewelry I could sell, a change of clothes. My photographic plates hidden in false-bottomed hat box. I hid it in the back of my wardrobe, ready to be grabbed if I needed to run. Because I knew that when the article printed, when Cameron saw his work exposed for all the world to see, there would be no more pretense of civility, no more careful negotiations, no more cold, calculated control. There would only be rage, and I needed to be ready. I went to bed that night and did not sleep. I lay in the darkness listening to the house settle, to the distant hum of the machines, to the sound of my own heart beating out the hours until dawn. And I thought about Adrian, about the way he had looked at me that night in the park when he asked me to run away, about the life we might have had in some other world, some better world, where love was not a crime and freedom was not a dream. But we did not live in that world. We lived in this one. And in this world, all I could do was fight with the tools I had been given, however inadequate they might be. The church bells struck 3 a.m, 4 hours until the newspapers printed, 4 hours until everything changed. I rose and dressed in the darkness. I went to my window and looked out over the city, over the neon lights that painted the fog in poisonous colors. Cameron's city, Cameron's empire, Cameron's future. But not for long. And in the distance, just visible through the fog, I saw the first gray hint of dawn. Chapter 5. The Tribune hit the streets at 7 a.m. I heard the newsboys calling before I even left my chambers, their voices echoing through the fog-thick streets. Scandal. Lord Hargrove exposed. Panopticon project revealed. I stood at my window and watched the city wake to the truth, watched the neon lights flickering against the gray dawn like dying stars. By 8, the house was in chaos. Servants rushing through the corridors, messengers arriving with urgent notes. The clatter of Cameron's boots on the marble floors as he paced through the entrance hall, his voice cutting through the confusion with cold precision. Get me my lawyers. Get me the editor of the Tribune. Get me everyone who had anything to do with this. I dressed carefully in a walking suit of charcoal gray, practical and severe. I pinned my hair back tight. I needed to look strong. I needed to look ready, because I knew that within minutes Cameron would come for me. And this time there would be no negotiations, no careful bargains, only the raw, terrible truth of what we had done to each other. The summons came at 8:30. His study, immediately. I descended the stairs with my head high, my hands steady. The servants averted their eyes as I passed. Whether from sympathy or fear, I could not tell. Perhaps both. The study door was closed. I opened it without knocking and stepped inside. Cameron stood behind his desk with a copy of the Tribune spread across the mahogany surface. The headline was printed in letters 3 inches tall. The article took up the entire front page and continued inside. Wickham had been thorough. Every detail, every name, every piece of evidence I had given him, laid out with devastating precision. The surveillance network, the manipulation of careers and reputations, the blacklists, the personal trackers, the plans for global expansion, and there, in a separate sidebar article, the photographs of his secret laboratory, the preserved brain, the experiments, the attempt to map and control human consciousness itself. London had woken to discover that its most celebrated industrialist was building a prison for the human soul. "You did this," Cameron said. His voice was very quiet, very controlled. But I could hear the fury beneath it, coiled tight as a spring. "You stole from me. You betrayed me. You gave my work to that failed journalist and told him to print lies. They are not lies," I said. "Every word is true. Every photograph is genuine. You know that." He moved around the desk toward me with slow, deliberate steps. "I made you an offer," he said. "I offered you safety, status, a place at the center of the future I was building. All you had to do was accept your role. All you had to do was obey. But you could not even do that, could you? You had to play the hero. You had to try to save people who do not want to be saved. People do not want to be controlled, I said. They do not want to live in a world where every thought and feeling is monitored and recorded, where love is dangerous and privacy is extinct. They do not know what they want. That is why they need someone like me to decide for them. His hand shot out and grabbed my wrist, his grip iron hard. Do you have any idea what you have done? The contracts I will lose? The political alliances that will crumble? Years of work, destroyed by one foolish woman who thought she could play at rebellion. I met his eyes without flinching. I am not playing, Cameron. I am fighting. For every person whose life you destroyed. For every soul you tried to reduce to data. For the right to love without permission and live without surveillance. You wanted to build a future without freedom. I am making certain that future dies here. He stared at me for a long moment, and I saw something shift in his expression. The cold control cracking, the machine faltering, and beneath it, finally, actual human emotion. Not love, not sorrow, just rage. Pure and incandescent and long suppressed. His hand tightened on my wrist hard enough to bruise. You think you have won, he said. You think that exposing my work will stop it. But you are wrong. This is not about one man or one project. This is about the inevitable march of progress. Today it is scanners and trackers. Tomorrow it will be something else. Something more refined, more invisible, more complete. You cannot stop what is coming, Evelyn. You can only choose whether to be part of it or be crushed beneath it. Then I choose to be crushed, I said, because some things are worth dying for. He released my wrist suddenly, shoving me backward. I stumbled but did not fall. He turned away from me. His hands braced on the desk, his shoulders rigid. Get out, he said. Take your things and leave this house. The engagement is terminated. I will ensure that the proper announcements are made. You are no longer welcome here. And my family? I asked. My father's debts are no longer my concern. He did not turn to face me. You made your choice. Now live with the consequences. I should have felt triumph. I should have felt relief. I was free. The engagement was over. I had escaped the cage. But all I felt was a strange, hollow emptiness. Because I knew that Cameron was right about one thing. I had won this battle, but the war was far from over. The technology existed now. The knowledge could not be unmade. And other men, perhaps smarter or more patient or more ruthless than Cameron, would take up the work where he left off. But I had bought time. I had exposed the danger. And sometimes, that was all you could do. Sound the alarm and hope that enough people listened. I left the study without another word. I climbed the stairs to my chambers and collected the bag I had packed. My photographic equipment, my clothes, the small collection of jewelry that was my own, not gifts from Cameron. Martha appeared in the doorway, her face stricken. Where will you go, miss? She asked. I do not know yet, but I will be all right. I touched her hand briefly. Thank you, Martha, for everything. I left Hargrove House through the front door this time, not the servants' entrance. I walked down the steps into the gray morning with my bag in hand and my head high. The newsboys were still calling the headlines. Passers-by stared at me, some recognizing me from the society pages, whispering behind their hands. The scandal would be immense. I would be notorious. But I found I did not care. I walked. I had no destination in mind, just the need to move, to put distance between myself and that house of machines and lies. The city spread around me, vast and indifferent, the neon lights flickering against the morning fog. London, Cameron's city, but also mine. Also everyone's who lived and loved and struggled within its bounds. I found myself in the small park where I had met Adrian that night, a lifetime ago. The fountain was still there, frozen now in the November cold. The benches were empty. I sat down and stared at the ice-covered water, trying to decide what to do next. And then I heard footsteps behind me. I turned, half expecting Cameron's men come to drag me back. But it was not Cameron's men. It was Adrian. He stood there in his simple dark coat, his hair disheveled, his eyes wide with something between disbelief and hope. "I had been reading the newspaper," he said. "I had been reading about what you did, about what you risked." His voice broke slightly. "Evelyn, I thought I had lost you forever. I thought you had chosen him." "I did choose him," I said quietly, "for a while, because he threatened you, because he threatened everyone I cared about." I stood slowly, afraid that if I moved too quickly, this moment would shatter like glass. But I could not live with that choice, so I fought him the only way I knew how. He crossed the distance between us in 3 quick strides. His hands found my face, cupping it gently, and I realized I was crying. I did not even know when the tears had started. "You brilliant, reckless, impossible woman," he whispered. "You could have been killed. You could have lost everything." "I did lose everything," I said. "The engagement is over. My family's debts remain. We will be ruined. There will be scandal. There will be consequences. Then we will face them together." His forehead touched mine, and I felt the warmth of him, the solidity, the realness of this moment after so many weeks of pretending and fear. "I do not have much to offer you, Evelyn. Just a small income and smaller rooms and a life far from the society you were born into. But I can offer you truth and freedom and love that does not come with conditions or cages. That is more than enough," I whispered. He kissed me then. There in the cold morning air, with the fog drifting around us and the distant sound of newsboys still calling the scandal. It was not a gentle kiss. It was fierce and desperate, and full of all the fear and longing we had been holding back for months. When we finally broke apart, we were both breathless. "What will you do now?" he asked. "Where will you go?" "I do not know. I need to find my family. I need to see how bad the damage is, and then I need to decide what comes next." I looked up at him. "But I know I cannot simply walk away." Cameron was right about one thing. The technology exists now. The knowledge is out there. Someone else will try to build what he built, perhaps someone worse. I cannot let that happen without at least trying to stop it. "Then I will help you," he said. "I know the engineering. I know the systems. Together we can find the weaknesses. We can design countermeasures. We can teach people how to protect themselves. It will be dangerous. Cameron may be disgraced, but he still has power. And there will be others who share his vision. I know." His hands tightened on mine. "But some things are worth fighting for. You taught me that." We stood there in the park as the morning brightened around us, the fog slowly lifting to reveal a city that was the same as it had been yesterday, and yet somehow different. The neon lights still blazed. The machines still hummed in their countless locations throughout London. But now people knew. Now they understood what was being done to them. And knowledge, however terrible, was the beginning of resistance. I did not know what would happen next. I did not know if we would succeed in stopping the spread of surveillance technology, or if we would simply delay the inevitable. I did not know if my family would forgive me, or if society would ever accept me again. I did not know if Adrian and I would have a future together, or if the forces aligned against us would tear us apart. But I knew that I had made the right choice, that I had fought for something that mattered, that I had refused to accept the cage, even when accepting it would have been easier and safer and more profitable. And I knew that I was not alone anymore. The weeks that followed were difficult. My father, when he learned what I had done, was furious and despairing in equal measure. The Ashford name was tainted by scandal. The debts remained unpaid. My mother and sisters faced social exile. But slowly, grudgingly, my father came to understand. He had been a young man once. He had loved my mother against his own family's wishes, and he recognized in me the same stubborn determination that had driven him to fight for what he wanted. Cameron retreated from public life. The government contracts were canceled. The Panopticon project was officially disbanded, though I knew that the research would continue in secret, in other hands with other names. Parliament convened hearings on surveillance technology and privacy rights. New laws were proposed, though whether they would be effective remained to be seen. Wickham won awards for his journalism. He used his restored reputation to continue investigating abuses of power, and we became allies, working together to expose other instances of technological overreach. And Adrian and I built a life. Not the life I had been raised to expect, with grand houses and society balls and all the trappings of wealth, but a life that was ours. We married quietly in a small church with only my family and a handful of friends in attendance. We lived in modest rooms in Bloomsbury, where I set up a new darkroom, and Adrian continued his work on railway safety systems. Together, we established something we called the Citizens Privacy Alliance, a small organization dedicated to educating people about surveillance technology and advocating for legal protections. It was slow work, difficult work. Most people did not want to believe that the machines they had come to trust could be used against them. But some listened, and slowly, we built a movement. On cold evenings, Adrian and I would sit by the fire in our small sitting room, and he would read aloud from engineering journals while I developed photographs for our next pamphlet. Sometimes I would look up and catch him watching me with an expression of such profound contentment that it made my heart ache. "Do you regret it?" he asked me once, "giving up everything you had?" I looked around at our tiny apartment with its mismatched furniture and smoke-stained walls, at the man I loved, whose genius was recognized by so few, but whose integrity was absolute, at the work we were doing together, small and unglamorous but vital. Not for a moment, I said, and it was true. I had lost wealth and status and all the security that came with being Lord Hargrove's wife. But I had gained something infinitely more valuable. I had gained my freedom, my voice, my right to love and fight and choose my own path. Years later, when the first real privacy protections were written into law, when the worst abuses of surveillance technology were finally curtailed through public pressure and parliamentary action, I would think back to that night at the Grand Neon Masquerade, to the moment I walked through Cameron's scanner with Adrian at my side, knowing what it would cost, choosing to do it anyway. That was the night I stopped being a commodity to be traded and became a person who could act. That was the night I learned that even in a world of machines and data and cold mechanical control, the human heart could still be a force for change. Cameron had been wrong about love. It was not a weakness. It was not a chemical imbalance to be diagnosed and corrected. It was the thing that made us most human, most alive, most willing to risk everything for something beyond ourselves. And that, I had learned, was a power greater than any machine. I stand at my window now, decades later, and look out over a London that has changed in ways both beautiful and terrible. The neon still blazes through the fog, but now there are laws about who can watch and who can be watched. There are protections for privacy, however imperfect. There is resistance to the dream of total control. The fight is not over. It never will be. Each new technology brings new opportunities for liberation and new threats to freedom. Each generation must choose whether they will accept the cages offered to them or whether they will fight for something better. But when I look back on my life, on the choices I made and the price I paid and the love I found in the midst of it all, I have no regrets. I walked through the scanner wearing a mask that could not hide me, and in doing so, I found the courage to unmask the man who would have made prisoners of us all. That is enough. That is everything. And I would do it again in a heartbeat.